Hi, everyone. My name is Aniyia Williams, and I am the lead of The Tech We Want, which is a network of people that are building infrastructure and tech products and services that center human thriving and responsible innovation. I am joined for this conversation by a few of the very, very important players in what we do in gathering people together when we are building community and building networks. These are four of the people who are behind the scenes making the magic happen. I'm joined by Maxine, by Heather, by Chloe, and by Prod. I'm going to let you all do a quick round of introductions yourselves, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Hi, I'm Maxine Yeo. I am really excited to talk about events with this awesome group of ladies. I am the program manager for The Tech We Want, and I do a lot of support on the events that we produce.
I'm Heather Mason, and I'm the CEO of Caspian Agency, and what we do is we help The Tech We Want create and produce convenings that have meaning and that matter, and we've been able to be partners, been very excited to be partners with you for a couple of years, and there's a whole team behind me, so it's not just me. I feel very privileged to sit here and represent that team because I know you know them well.
My name is Chloe Jackman, and I am the CEO or Chief Hype Officer of Chloe Jackman Photography. And I have been telling the photojournalistic story of The Tech We Want since the beginning, right? I can't remember how long it's been because the years are all blurring together, but it feels like a couple of years.
Has been.
It has been a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's been a really beautiful thing to watch. I get to be in the room and in presence of some really challenging conversations, and it's a really beautiful thing to watch the evolution of this come to be, and to know that I get to be part of it as it continues to grow and evolve. So happy to be here.
Happy to have you. My name is Prod, but my actual name is Prodpran. You can call me Prod. I'm the relationship manager on the Tech We Want team. I'm very fortunate to be working with Aniyia and Max and many others as well. And with building relationships and such, it's really important that we have this shared experience and making sure that we create these experiences of gathering. And so I'm really, really lucky to be among folks who see the importance in investing in this type of work.
Wonderful. So I think that Prod actually set us up for the perfect first question, which is, what is it that you think is important about us getting people together, specifically in person, not grinding on the box, but why are these gatherings so important? I'm going to start with you, Heather.
Okay. I mean, that is my pride and joy, and I am extremely biased towards that direction because that is what my company helps people do. And I have never found another way that really moves an issue or an initiative forward or creates community more than being in person. I mean, this conversation already would be very different if we were in Zoom boxes, and it would feel very different. And I mean, there's tons of science behind it of just even how you react to people. I mean, down to the fact of if I touch you, you can detect my heartbeat on your skin. Our energy field, by science, is detected 3 feet out from our bodies. So there's a true physical and scientific connection, but I also think there's a connection of, we all know it. When you get together with people, you learn about them, and you're less likely to be all businessy. You're going to get into other facets and parts of who they are as a human, and only in person can do that. And so I think, and again, I know I'm incredibly biased, but every single dollar, every single hour of time spent towards that, it reaps the benefit multifold for any type of organization that's trying to move the needle on social change.
Yes, love it. Chloe, you next.
I'm not going to have all the science stuff behind it. I have no scientific research.
About heartbeats and energy.
But just that, I think that there's a humanity that comes with being in person, right? Down to after you have a long day of having really intense, emotional, hard conversation that needs to be done in person to really move it forward and to get to resolve, right? Because you have to continue to coexist in that space with people. So it kind of pushes you through the uncomfortability and into the space of, okay, now how do we get to the other side of this? How do we then continue to coexist? We have 3 more days together. We have to get through all of this. How do we push through that? But beyond that, then you're maybe walking into the elevator together, or you're going to dinner together, or you're doing something else after that. And so then the humanity continues to gel because you're like, oh, we disagreed earlier, but I actually realized that there's several things that we agree on. So how do we find that common ground again tomorrow when we have to revisit this thing? Like, it just creates that human connection that is necessary. Whereas if you click off a Zoom, you can go and be like, well, and that didn't work, and I'm mad at them because of this, and and I'm just gonna go like fume in my own story that I'm like caught up in. And when you're in person, you have to continue to look that person in the eye, and you got to be able to do that with your own like peace in place, right? So, and as a visual storyteller, I am reading people's I can see the room, I can see the uncomfortability like building up, I can see the uncomfortability like melting away. I watch all of those things happen, whether or not I'm taking pictures of it. It's my whole job to be able to read what's going on in that space. And it's been really beautiful to see the like hard stuff come up, and then the hard stuff work through it all. And kind of like, it's like, working through that when you get a massage and they're like working through that knot on your back, right? Like watching that and then watching it kind of melt away, and people coming back together.
I'm going to come back to this particular thing because I'm very interested in having you expand a little bit more on what it's like to look through the camera lens at what happens in the room. But before that, Prod, I would love to hear from you first.
Well, it's all of what like you all just said, like, and also like it's in the little details, right? Like, like the food or eating together, you have this like experience together. Maybe there's music too when you listen to this thing together. It's where like the inside jokes come out. It's where like the you might be like, maybe it's like a little bit of gossip. Maybe you're sharing some tea. Maybe there's like when you're like walking from like room A to room B, and then you have this like conversation that sparks something. And that those little side conversations don't happen really elsewhere, except for in these experiences that like we can like curate, we can create, and we can kind of like create the container for like those like really special moments to happen. And I think that's like what makes us human, that what makes us be able to like collaborate better and work better together.
I love it. Max?
I think that what everybody is really pointing at is like our opportunity to like build trust with each other. We were talking a little bit the other day, Aniyia, about how like when you do things through the box, like through technology, it's only limited to the things that we can anticipate needing input or like needing output. But when you're in person, there's like so many different opportunities that we can't even like sit here on these couches and like list.
Yes.
So like on one hand, it's an extremely expansive place to bring people into, to work across difference, to take care of the little details. And on the other hand, we actually have this really amazing opportunity to create the type of environment that we wish that people would be able to spend more time in. If you're reaching through the screen, there's so many other things happening in their worlds. And so this is a really great opportunity that we have to show care in the ways that we want to highlight and provide that kind of, like you say, container for trust building.
Yes. So I'm going to also try to tie these things together before I come back to you, Chloe, and say that, one of the things that I think was very important in us making a decision to convene people in person when we very first started this project, bringing the Tech We Want luminaries in together, was that we wanted them to get a sense of who we were as people and who each other are as people, and to make a decision about whether they wanted to trust us and each other enough to go on an epic journey, be part of a grand social experiment in a way. But I think the other thing, especially to what Max just touched on, is that events and us getting people together and how we kind of create this environment, it allows us to be able to foster and help create a certain type of way that humans are going to be together. We actually spend quite a lot of time talking and thinking about how we can create the right conversations, or how we can create a level of safety in the room that allows people to feel like they can talk to someone who they have never met before about almost anything. And also to Max's point about, I think that we get to try to give people a little taste of this future that we're trying to build in this little bubble that we're able to build in this gathering. And so taking that, like, I want to come back to that, like, behind the lens, because I feel like you're remembering a particular moment that happened in this project.
Y'all were just like, hey, come down to Palm Springs and photograph this thing. And I was like, great, let's go. Palm Springs, sounds great. Parker, amazing. This is awesome. And I don't really understand what's about to happen. Like, I've gotten kind of like a download, but I don't really know what's about to happen, right? And then I'm just seeing all these people coming together who know each other, maybe don't know each other in person, but know of each other. And so I'm watching these people like engage and come together. And I watched a very intense, like emotional couple of days unfold in front of me, talking about trust, talking about the systems that have been put in place, talking about how hard it is to move any needle anywhere and do anything, and how frustrating it is, and why there should be any trust. You know what I mean? And I mean, my jaw was just on the floor. I mean, I was like, do your job, Chloe, but pick up your jaw and do your job. But like listening to all of these really intense emotional conversations, it was just, you know, I left there wiped from being a part of that, but also grateful to know that there are people who are having these challenging things and confronting these kinds of moments and understanding what you were trying to do, and kind of watching you have to navigate that. I'm sure you also went home and slept for several days after that first convening.
Yes.
And it was uncomfortable, and that one was probably a little bit more uncomfortable. I felt like there was more energy directed at you about like, why should we have this trust? And then in gatherings that came after that, it was more everybody trying to work through, I don't know, the bigger issues with which we live under, what it is like to be a person of color and trying to move the needle forward, and what it's like to be a white person and a woman, and, you know.
And in many ways, like, can we trust each other given that we have these different vantage points and
Yes.
different experiences, and we're trying to tackle these issues together?
Because in so many movements, there's always somebody who feels like they aren't being heard, seen. You know, I was, just for a funny little reference, I was in a play about women's right to vote when I was in high school, and how we were fighting for the women's right to vote. And what ended up happening was that Black men got the right to vote before women got the right to vote, right? But at one point, women and Black men were fighting for the right to vote together. And then Black men got the right to vote, and they were like, well, okay, we got, you keep working for yours.
Go on, good luck.
And like that, but that can so often happen, right? When you're on the other side of where we're trying to go, do you bring everybody with you? Can you trust that you're going to turn back around and like not leave that person behind? Like, I don't know. How do we find that trust? How do we build that trust? How do we know that you're not going to be like, cool, I got mine. Good luck.
So I also know that Prod and Max, you have both worked in Canada with this like Center for Dialogue. Like, you have experience also bringing people together, talking about really hard topics. Like, I'm very interested to also hear, like, are there lessons from the work that you've done in those contexts that you are seeing also pop up in the tech we want, or that you feel like, yeah, this tracks with what continues to happen in these kinds of things?
I guess there's some like really interesting things around like having shared definitions. You know, it's really hard to have a conversation with people when you think you're talking about the same thing or you're not, or some people have a wealth of information that they're speaking to, and other people maybe don't have that same like library of information available to them. And so one of the biggest challenges with being able to create those conversations and allow people to have hard conversations is to make sure that they're having like shared definitions, like a shared like knowledge bank to draw from in terms of like what they pull from in the conversations, as not to exclude people as well, right? To be able to actually get to the parts of the conversations that are useful between these two parties or these four parties. So you kind of need to identify that space and make sure that people are onboarded onto that and ready to enter the conversation in that way. But Prod has a lot of experience working with like all across Canada on topics like this. So
Yeah, my background was more in like public consultation and engagement. So like we worked with like different like government bodies when they're doing engagement with folks on the ground, and so there's a lot of lessons like we can learn from it for sure. And I'm sure that like others will also probably like see the same things. I think like one thing that I would bring is that like it is like the work happens way before the actual gathering happens. It is like arguably like the the biggest part in a way. And part of that is to start building that shared vocabulary to make sure that everyone that shows up knows that, you know, they're meant to be there. They have something to contribute, especially like that vocabulary piece. They have something to share. They know that there's something in it for them too. It's not just like, you know, an extractive process. So I think there's that. And so that's the starting piece. And then what's important that a lot of people forget is that like after the gathering, there's also a lot of work. And that's like the follow-up, the closing the loop piece that is like so important, so that like whatever has happened in that, like that magical, those magical things that we talked about like within the gathering doesn't just like get lost in the ether somewhere, that like it carries forward, that those relationships are stewarded like in a good way forward. And I think like that's like really important as well. And so just keeping like, you know, the opening and the closing and the continuation like going, it's a cycle.
Yeah. I love this. And I'm like, I can't resist like in both of what you're on, like pool of meaning. We were just joking before we started taping about this term, pool of meaning, which is one of my favorite phrases that I feel like everybody comes in and we add to the pool of meaning and then we make sense of it and we make some decisions together. Then we decide to move to action together. Heather, as someone who has been in the business of gathering people for time, I'm like, I won't even try to guess. Okay. But I'm like, what are some of the things that you would say, like, you know, that you, because I'm like, you literally have it down to a science. Like one of the things that I learned when I first met you was like, we have a process and it goes like this and these are the things. And then from that, we will craft an event.
Yes,
so
this
like,
is true.
I'm sure that those lessons are hard won. Are there any things that you can share just in terms of like, where do these things go wrong? Like, what are those rookie mistakes people make? Oh
man, so many. And you're right. That is one of our big things is it's not an art, it's a science.
Yes.
And that's why I love what you said, Prod, which is something we focus on and why I'm so impressed with what the Tech We Want does is from an investment and from trust that your audience is giving you and your attendees, that you're going to start in advance. You're going to have the event and you're not going to drop them off. And that's huge. And I know that's what you've done in so many ways. And I think that's incredibly important when you're trying to build community and trust. And so when you say what's rookie mistake, I would say probably number one is when people come to us and say, we want to do one event. And my answer is always don't. Please don't. Because if it has to do with some high level conversations, which we work in the social goods sector, so people are having conflicts, they're having really intense conversations potentially. If you're doing one event, how are you building trust through that? How are you saying this one engagement is going to meet all, end all, be all? You have to take time to build the culture, to build the onboarding, to have those people and carry those people afterwards.
Yes.
So to me, that is already a massive rookie mistake to do one event and only think in one event terms. I would say the other biggest piece is not having a lot of intentionality around those interactions. Yes, there's awesome moments that you don't want to take away from of seeing someone by the cheese plate or the elevator, and that's wonderful, and those are great. But when you take people's time, I take it very seriously. You're taking their minutes. You're taking minutes away from their family, from their friends, from their life. If that is not intentional, not controlled, intentional, curated, careful, care, you know, what are we doing? And so to me, that's a rookie mistake as well, because that is a lot of investment by a company and organization. I mean, your time, all those hours. And sometimes people are like, no, we'll put on an event, which is my most hated phrase. That's like me saying, I'm just going to put on building a mini mall. Are you now? Is that how you're going to do it? So it has to have a lot of care and intention. There's a process. You're right. So
you're not going to get to any juice. You're not going to get to any real solution or vulnerability if it doesn't feel like you've curated a space that, I've been told not to use safe but necessary, right?
I like
because
that.
Safe is not, you can't guarantee safety for everybody in a room, right? But you can create necessary space. And you can't do that if you haven't put the calendar, and that people know that there's going to be follow up and follow through and like a completion to this circle. And so I totally hear you where it's like, you can't just do this one time. You can.
Yeah, you can. And people do it. And people do it. And then they say, we did that event. And the reason I don't like events is because afterwards, nothing happened. You go back to your office. I'm like, then somebody made a mistake. Somebody made a mistake. If you felt that somebody did not do the investment, do the time and honor your minutes so that afterwards it just felt like it fell apart. That's not fair. And we don't like to be a part of those events. We like to be a part of these events.
Yes. I'm like, well said.
Yeah.
So the other thing, I feel like this is good because Max, you're the bridge also between a lot of the programmatic strategy and working with Caspian and like our other kinds of production partners. And since we're talking so much about you have to put this care, you have to put this intention into it, what are some of the things that you are thinking about and looking out for when you have to kind of play this translator between like mission and cultural goals that we have set and like what we're doing and what we're creating, like how we create that safety, that belonging, that togetherness, that trust?
Yeah, I think that like we choose our production partners with a lot of intention. Like we ensure that we are working with people who are values aligned, who do understand like that there is a larger point to the work that we're doing beyond just this one event, just this isolated thing. And you know, that just makes a world of difference because people are already committed to like trying things differently, doing things in a new way, caring about things that maybe like in other contexts don't necessarily seem important. And so that's one of the things that I think helps us to navigate that like programmatic strategy and implementation. But yeah, I think that another part of it is just like continuing to like build relationships. I mean, like Heather and I, like we hang out, like we have a great relationship. Like Chloe and I, like all of us, like are really like ready to enter into that more vulnerable space that we need to be in order to do this work. We are holding, as you say, which is a great term, necessary spaces for people to gather and build momentum in communities and in movements. And so doing that is really hard, and it requires us on the back end, like before everything, to be able to be really vulnerable with each other. And so that is not something that like necessarily is like written in any contract or in any like scope or negotiation, but it is something that we as a program and I see in our partners are really committed to doing because we know that that is the larger overall mission of what we're trying to do. And it doesn't happen without that vulnerability with each other and that trust.
So I also am just thinking about how there's like so many different levels to the way in which we think about these things, like everything from, okay, we should pick a venue that has these types of things given what we want, to like now even just recently at one of our last gatherings, me kind of coming to like learn this human pattern about fire, right? When you have people sitting around a fire, and that if there's like no fire, when there's like a break in conversation, people feel like, oh, okay, I'm done, I'm gonna like get up and go. But when there's a fire that people are sitting around and there's a break and there's a silence, they just kind of look into the fire until someone thinks of something else, and then the conversation picks back up. And so it's just really funny because I feel like we think about these things even down to these like levels of detail where it's like, okay, well maybe we should like sit people around a fire and like see if like what happens. So like I'm looking at you, Prod, because I feel like we have brought you in under the guise of, you know, relationship management, which like feels very nebulous because it's a title that we just kind of made up, but also we know is such an important and key piece that we were like missing. Like there were so many conversations that Max and I were having. We're like, I don't know what it's called, but it like looks like this. It's something like this. Because we knew that there was so many important different stakeholder groups that we have in this project. So for instance, we know that we have centered in the first half of this project quite thoroughly these 15 incredible luminaries, these leaders who come with such incredible experience and perspective and sit in these different areas of our current ecosystem. And then we also started to realize that there were many other stakeholders that we also needed to be bringing in and needed to also elevate the role of, including folks on the core team and like folks that are a part of creating these productions, because there was also, to Max's point, relationship building and trust and vulnerability that was happening, that we were actually realizing that like even the success that we try to have with like the luminary group and trying to move them from point A to point B hinges on us actually having a level of togetherness and feeling like we're aligned. And a lot of that is in managing relationships. And so now we're even starting to try to bring in a new stakeholder group. Like we're starting to talk about how do we bring other funders into this project, and knowing that there's even these very different power dynamics and all these other things. But before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, Prod, I would love for you to sort of share, just as you're ramping up into this new role that we've created, what are you learning about just how we have to think about building relationships and what is important, especially as we transfer that from, gathering into creating that sustained like connection?
What I'm learning from like as we kind of like engage more people is that like we're giving them like a little bit of a taste, and that's the invitation, right?
Yes.
The invitation of like, come join us and see what it looks like.
Yeah,
because
the
and I
appetizer.
remember that every time the amuse bouche.
Exactly.
Every time I remember something you said, Aniyia, that really like struck me, was that like you said that every time someone joins the team or someone pitches in, it changes like what's the thing that we're building is. And I think that's part of like the beauty of it. And I think being like learning to be open to that, to the process of that growth is something that is like both like it's beautiful, it's emerging, and like it brings out the gifts in everyone. And I think that's like, and being able to hold that and like nurture that is like part of that, like the relationship we want to be building, rather than like doing this in a silo segmented way, and that like, this is what I want for you, this is what I'll give you, done. Like that's not how we work. And like how we gather is a reflection of that. And I think that's like definitely one of the biggest lessons that like I think I'm like learning and will continue to learn.
Yes, I do think that there's like a lot in that too, just about how we are trying to not only gather and do the things that we talked about together, but how we're trying to create these like new kinds of reciprocal relationships between different people too. And I think it's interesting because even as you were just talking, I started to realize that I'm like, okay, we actually have even like Heather and as an extension of that, Max, that are kind of really like leading the charge on what we do with people when we kind of get them together in place. And I would also add like Carla and Jocelyn as our facilitators. They do an amazing job with designing the interactions between people in the space. And then, Prod, you and I are kind of like thinking and coming into like, okay, now we've like done this thing. We've created this experience. We've planted these seeds of trust with people. Like, what do we do with them when they are departing so that we kind of keep those relationships like fresh or new, or like get the information exchange happening, tee up the thing that needs to happen before we go into the next event. And so I say all of this because I'm like, there is like actually a system that we're developing around this to bring it back to our theory of gathering. And I think that we're still growing into it to some degree. I'm going to like point back at Max because I'm curious to know, like, what do you feel like we're still missing or like trying to hone in on and figure out that we haven't quite nailed yet?
I think something that we've been talking about a lot, especially with some of our public facing events that are less like focused on luminaries or other like immediate stakeholders, is collective sense making. So just being able to gather a group of people and basically do an experiment where they have to like understand each other, recognize each other, regard each other in their stances on various topics, and come away with a shared understanding of, what space did we share? Like, how did we regard each other? That's something that we really want to create in some of our more public facing events. That's something that we want people to have an experience of in order to build trust, in order to build confidence, in order to be seen in a space that maybe they haven't been seen in before. A lot of what we try to do is create the necessary spaces in places that maybe don't often have necessary spaces for those folks to show up and stand in the type of power or the type of knowledge that they do actually have to offer into that space. And so in order for them to do that, the collective sense making that happens is the thing that kind of follows through. Like if it's a public event, we can't chase every single person after. We can tell a story after. We can send communications out, but we're not going to tag every single person that walks out of it. But what they can walk away with is that collective sense making piece. And so for us to get really tight on how we actually execute on that is probably our next biggest challenge.
I mean, I think that that's a great setup too, to come back to Heather and Chloe as like folks that are in the room all the time. Like, do you feel like that is happening in lots of other spaces, or do you feel like people are still falling short? Like, what's the landscape like? How would you maybe compare a lot of how we like to gather people in this project to other like experiences or rooms that you two are in different contexts.
Yeah, in fact, I'm really glad you asked me that, because as you were even speaking about that, to me, that's very different from a lot of our client base, which has, as we all know, that funder, kind of either fundee, grantee, investee, however they want to name them, mentality. We all know there's a power dynamic there. We all do. But a lot of them that I see will look at that as fearful. And how do we contain that energy? Because those folks will always come in with an energy of, I got to either impress my funder. I need to make sure my funder likes me, will continue to like me. I don't want to get in any conflicts with someone because maybe my funder won't like a grantee that's getting in a conflict with someone. So I'm going to be agreeable. So there's this entire thing happening. And I come, from the movie industry. It was my first career. And we would have pitch festivals because it's a very similar nervous energy. If only I could get to Spielberg, he'd green light my film, right? And there he is right there. Well, you might not get to Spielberg, but they would have these pitch festivals. And somehow that kind of alleviated some of that energy. But at least what I see in a lot of these landscapes is there's that energy and there's the management and the fear. What if someone comes and asks me for money? It's like, well, you're funder. It's kind of in the name. It's in the name called funder. So I'm always surprised about that. What if they do the thing that I'm doing? I don't want that. I'm like, but why did you go work Starbucks? And nobody's going to ask you for money if you're a Starbucks. So I'm always confused by that because we're constantly talking to our clients about how to manage that. Mm-hmm. What I think you guys have done, which I find fascinating, is you've just taken the lid off and gone, well, there it is. We're just gonna dive into it.
Yeah.
We're gonna go into that pool of meaning.
Yes.
And we're gonna find it and swim in it, and we're gonna make a space that is okay to do that. That you, as a potential power dynamic experiencer, do not have to be fearful of us.
Yeah.
And you do not have to be afraid of conflict or tensions. Let's say, there's some tensions on views. We're going to allow you to do that. We're going to encourage you to do that so that we can get to that other side in 2 or 3 days. And so kind of going back to what you said, what I see is more programming, in a sense, to alleviate that type of really uncomfortable, really necessary time to curate vulnerability, exposure, all those really frightening words, and we're programming through it.
Yeah.
We're programming through it on issues-based, oriented, very important things. But I think until you get to this deepness, I think it's going to impact any organization's ability to move the needle on actual change.
I agree. And I mean, I feel like this even happens in our super carefully, yes, and we can talk about anything space, but those conversations are still going to happen. It's just that the people who need to hear them most are not going to hear the most important conversations. They're going to happen maybe at the bar afterward with just a couple people around who are going to be like, well, don't tell anybody. But when that could have been a group conversation. Chloe.
I would say that the space I'm in with the Tech We Want is unique compared to a lot of the spaces I'm in. We work with a lot of DE&I, right? But we're working with that on a large scale, large corporation, right? So I'm in the room listening to powerful people who have, made it very far and are doing their best to bring everybody up with them, but they have to do it in this kind of structured container of the organization with which they work in, right? So there's boundaries and there's electric wires that you could touch if you go the wrong direction. So I'll often hear them say things that are very profound that will kind of knock the socks off the people in the audience. But I don't know if there's not as much room for the conflict and the necessary space in these spaces that I'm in. It's a little bit more curated in a way that is meant to stay within certain boundaries to keep it from ruffling too many feathers. I was listening to somebody speak the other day, and she explained that when you, and I'm hoping I get this whole thing right. If you Google black, a black person, I think if you Google a monkey still shows up. Google can't get it correct Like there's something wrong with like the imaging, and this is from like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. She's like, this happened back then and they haven't actually solved this problem yet. And, you know, she was a Black woman on stage with a bunch of white people in a room full of white people. And she said this, and I could see everybody in the room kind of be like, oh, whereas like I had to sit down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I had to sit down. She said something that was so jarring to me that it made me have to like sit down and like take a breath.
Yes.
And everybody else is kind of like, wow. So anyways, continue talking. You know what I mean? Like that's really unfortunate, but like not really having that same impact. And there wasn't like space afterwards. Like I went up to her afterwards and said something, right? But there wasn't space afterwards, or there wasn't like a dialogue that continued because of that. Everybody was so uncomfortable in the room that they just had to like, because this was a tech conference, like they didn't want to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
You know? They were like, cool, thank you for sharing that. And let me ask you another follow-up question about something else that we talked about 10 minutes earlier. And so like I find that I'm we're just gonna
move over that landmine. Not there.
Exactly.
So we, in the space that we're working in with the tech we want, it's and like you said, like Jocelyn and Carla, like they're like, I watch them facilitate these things
So
and kind of
good.
like move it, and I'm like in awe of the way that they can take these conversations and like, okay, I feel this thing happening here, like I'm gonna move into this space, and then okay, let's bring it back over here, and they can kind of just like help pull it out. They remind me of my therapist, you know. I'm like, I'm fine. She's like, no, you're not. Like, let's dig into this further. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. And she's like, no, you are not. Let's dig into that further. And I'm like, no. And then I'm like crying. And I'm like, why am I crying? And it feels like that's, you know, that's why you were very intentional in choosing these two really powerful humans to help facilitate these things, because they see the thing, they hear it, they feel it bubbling up, and they continue to dig at it until it's at the surface, and then we're dealing with it as a group. And that's really important. And I don't think that it's just not something that everybody's doing, because nobody wants to be uncomfortable.
Right.
We live in a world of wanting to be comfortable.
Can I plus one on that? Because that was the
Yes,
other
plus one,
thing
girl.
I know that you had said, what's rookie mistake?
Yes.
Huge rookie mistake is people like, we're going to have our CEO speak on this and and facilitate this. And it's like, no.
Like that sounds terrifying.
And yeah, for us, we're like, we're seeing the train, we're seeing no. And, or they'll say our VP is going to do this or whatever. And it's like, you need to hire a professional facilitator who knows how to do this, because it's a professional job.
Yes.
And that's why I'm with you. I would want to move in those difficult conversations. You have to have someone who does. And I think a big rookie mistake is people go, well, we want to put our, potential leadership in charge of this. And it's like, then you will see bad things happen potentially with them, because you don't want to put them in that position.
And nobody wants to question them.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not their jobs. Like
And
they
it's not
don't,
their
they're not
jobs,
trained
yeah.
to do that. Later on, Jocelyn's going to be on a different panel where she talks a little bit about how important it is to have facilitators as part of a movement in the work. And so that's like partially where Prod and I's background come from as well, in dialogue and facilitation, and understanding that really is the thing that allows people to get from one place to another. It doesn't just emerge. It's not just emergent. There's a lot of intentionality, work, craft, and talent that goes into doing that. And it's an investment. It's an investment in making sure that you're hiring the right talent, making sure you're bringing in the right resources for people to actually be in that space. And something that I wanted to connect these three conversations on was, you're talking about how people are trying to limit how people will ask me for money, or if people will ask me for money. And you're speaking on how there's this particular container, if you still want to talk about DEI, you're only allowed to do it in these particular areas. You might touch a live wire here. You might get, that's like a construction zone. You can't go there. So there's all these kind of boundaries and containers inside of these organizations and institutions that already exist, that are kind of baked in to the sauce or the bread or whatever food item we're having today.
That's delicious.
That I think is one really fundamental difference with the tech we want being where it's at, and with us trying to bring in new relationships, that we are not in that place where we're not coming from the same level of institutional seniority.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people come into it, they do genuinely change they change the way the bread bakes, they change the way the sauce tastes. And that's because of that more expansive understanding of what they have to offer, and that it's not just limited to these parts of the house. But that is also a really big challenge, I think, in the offer that we have to invite people into one space that we share with events and two as partners. So I think that's kind of connecting those three pieces that I'm seeing with the three of you and all the work that you're doing and highlighting. It's just so cool.
Totally. I'm like, and I think there's a few things in that I want to pull out. Like, one, we've talked a lot about how important it is to build the containers, right? Build the right kind of containers with the right kind of like elements that we know are going to help us achieve what we're hoping to achieve, get people to feel the way that they like need to feel, just comfortable enough, and like knowing that discomfort is inevitable in some of the like the kinds of conversations we're having. Discomfort and conflict is inevitable, and being ready to like handle that and make sure that all of the things are ready to be responsive to that, which I would add even does start with, like, in some ways with me having conversations with our facilitators before the event, or even with other people that show up from Omidyar Network, to kind of prime them for the fact that there are going to be things that are going to be said that are maybe not going to feel complimentary. Maybe you're going to feel attacked. Like, this is what you're going to do when these moments happen, and this is what you're not going to do. And like, those are really important things to, I think, prime people, especially the ones that come in with an outsized amount of power in the room, to be able to know how to show up and what to do, which I do think that a lot of people are, at the end of the day, pretty grateful for, like knowing how to dance when you get into the room and everyone's on the floor. But yeah, so I think that is really, really key. And I think, Max, you're also kind of touching on a little bit too, that there are trade-offs inherent with our approach, our very deep, robust approach to seeing whole humans in this space, being willing to wade into these uncomfortable territories. Like, one, all the time and preparation that it takes, and making sure that you have the right people in place, like that has a cost. And, just knowing that when we bring new people into this, that changes the shape of that container, and us needing to metabolize that, like, it speaks to a level of complexity that we're always managing, some anxiety of not knowing as new things become revealed that we have to manage all of the time. And also just like the sort of time to get to know and to get comfortable with people. Like, I think one of the things that is, a challenge that is not impossible, but I think we're still kind of figuring out what the right way is to do, is like, how and when do we onboard new people into this? Because once we bring some folks in, it's like, we're just like setting the baseline of like, okay, this is the new normal. And then new people come in, and okay, there's the new normal. And then new people come in, and then it's the new normal. And so like, but I think that is what it looks like in my mind when we are using diversity as a strength, and honestly like a competitive edge over something that has to be like limited and contained, So yeah.
I love that. Coin that one, baby. The diversity as a competitive edge, because I like that. Because it's a different makeup. It's a different setting. It's a different space. Like, the people who are marginalized, you bring them together, and there's a different, like, arms are open in a different way. Maybe there's caution in certain ways, and that's just the way the whole system is set up to keep us all fucking down. But
I was like, wow.
We've already ripped the swearing Band-Aid off.
There we go.
Oops. That's the way the system is set up, right? To keep us all, everything we talked about earlier, right? Like, the system is set up so that we do not move forward, and that we do not trust each other, and that we cannot come together and trust that you really are here and bringing this money to help move the needle forward and move social change and do all of these things, because how could it be trusted? Because, there's never been any trust, because that's the way the system is set up. But also, you're putting together a room of people who have, like, you're like walking through fire, doing those, like, you can walk in the hot coals and do those like trust exercise or whatever. And
Trust falls.
Trust falls
in the hot coals.
Like,
Like, why not? Bring
trust
it on.
falling onto hot coals. And then when new people come in, like, because there's been trust and because there's been hard work done, you trust that the new people who are part of the new makeup are just part of the family. Like, it is just, I don't need to worry. Like, you're part of the family. It's and then it's just easy. It is more easeful. There's a new normal, but also the trust fall onto the hot coals has already proven that there's a level there, and there's like an open arms, and there's an ability to grow. Like, we know we have to grow, and the way to grow is to bring new people in who have new ideas and fresh blood and fresh ideas, and that happens in the space.
Well,
diverse.
and I think it's challenging because you bring up a real interesting challenge that happens like in anything that we've done with having a group. I'm a soccer player, right? When you've been in a soccer
course you
team
are.
forever, exactly. I love it. And you get that new girl who comes in and she's playing left wing, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, this is how we play. And so I think it's almost like a danger and a strength to have a really tight cohort. And but how are we going to allow that new person in? And will that new person allow our bubble to get bigger? Do we want to how do we have a mechanism to allow those new ideas from that new person to become a part of our organism?
Yes.
Or are we so tight that we become cliquey? And I think that's always a tension of and I think that's what you were alluding to, which is tricky because tight, awesome, wonderful, trusting groups sometimes can then become the very thing that holds out other folks just based on the trust level they have.
Yeah.
And it's like, how does that become open? And maybe the left wing had a great idea, and scored a bunch of goals. We're like, oh, let's incorporate that into my soccer bubble.
Exactly.
So
I do think that is like the part of the perpetual kind of like journey and tweaking and refining that we're all kind of like hitting at. And once in a while, like it does kind of require us to maybe get explicit and create a new set of agreements. Like, okay, this is why we're working on codes of conduct and community charters. And like, there are some things that we can like, okay, write the rules down so that when they come into this space, they could sort of see them. Even I wanted, this reminds me of Max, that you thought about this after one of our recent gatherings, that you were like, oh, also when we're doing events and we have like, folks like Caspian, we have our wonderful video team that we're working with at Carbon Thread that bring in all of their other people that need to help with making this thing happen. But they're not in all of the conversations that we're having when we're spending an hour just talking about how do we make sure we don't like do XYZ thing to make someone uncomfortable or whatever. And so we were like, really, so then it's like we become like we are a project that then is like, we need to think about this and create a system to make sure that like folks that are even just with us temporarily, like understand the culture that we're creating and like how we expect people to show up, and that we can try to bring them into that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the main like focuses of that idea too is that there are all of these people that have the opportunity to have an impact on the people that enter their space. So whether you're like somebody who does security, whether you're like a bartender, whether you're somebody who works events or in any capacity, right? You have the opportunity to create an experience for somebody. And those people oftentimes like do really care about that, right? Like they do want people to walk away like smiling and happy and feeling good about themselves and all that kind of thing. And when we're entering these spaces, like I spoke to earlier, where sometimes there aren't the necessary spaces that we're trying to create, they don't necessarily have the skills to do that for the range of people that we're trying to welcome and center in our spaces. And so for me, like when I'm thinking about that project that we've been talking about, to try and like bring them into that space with us, is also like an opportunity to give people the skills that they really desperately also want to have in order to still like excel at their roles and in order to feel confident in spaces that are different from what we would, see as the norm, right? Like people's discomfort is powerful. And so giving them the tools to navigate it, giving them the tools to understand like their own seat of power in the situation and like what pieces they have control over and can hold is really, really important. And I think part of that is, to me, in some ways, like a gift to all the people that we can work with, right? If they see it that way.
Well, and I was going to say, I know we've talked about that a couple times, and that always occurs to me too, as far as, what we see in the landscape. Some of our events will have, 25 people working on it, as far as event staff on the ground. Sometimes plus we'll also have the AV teams. We'll have all sorts of teams. And I've been there when the AV guys have come and said, oh my gosh, I'm crying. This is my favorite event all year. Because of this, my daughter has gotten into, I turned her on to this foundation's work. And I've gone to my clients sometimes and been like, you have a ripple effect that is not just the attendees in the room. Everyone who's working on this actually has ears and eyes. They can see it, but they forget. It's like the AV guy who's playing your videos is watching these videos, and they're crying in the rehearsal. And then the staff who's checking you in and saying, here's your badge, is being impacted in a deep way. And so to your point, why not embrace, engage, and then also help them make better decisions about your event? Because sometimes it's not even their fault, because we try to onboard them as best we can. But, if they're coming from corporate events, they're going to order steak and caviar for your fancy dinner. And we have to go, no, no, they just don't know better.
Yeah.
And they might say, well, we're going to block this off and make this completely hard to get into and inaccessible, not because they're doing something wrong. They don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where this kind of vendor relationship, when it becomes partnership, deep level partnership,
Yeah.
we can further your goals as a part of that container as well. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So
And I love how you guys do that too.
we
Do
try.
it so well.
We're trying.
Yes.
I've learned so much
Yeah.
being part of. I mean, my mind is blown every time we have a gathering, and I'm realizing more and more the impact that these amazing humans are having in the world around them and the larger world beyond that. Every time I get to hear them speak and just be in their presence. So that's one of the favorite things about my job, right? Especially working in the spaces that I generally tend to work in, even if I'm working in these spaces that are a little more structured and whatever. I'm still getting to hear these powerful, inspirational speakers, people who have climbed mountains to get to where they are, and they're doing all these things, and they're inspiring the next generation and all of that. But through the hard conversations and through the joyful moments, I'm also learning a ton, and feel so privileged to be a part of. I go back and I'm trying to explain to the team everything, and I'm and then we talked about that, and then they learned this, and and they're like, yeah, and I'm like, well, I'm not really explaining right, but we're doing really good work. But how do you water it? How much light does it need? All these little things that you have to figure out, these little nuances that are so important, and to just continually first of all, give yourselves grace in this building of this thing that you were building from scratch that has not been built before, and then also to do it in this really thoughtfully curated way. It's going to be foolproof by the time you're done.
Well, I don't know about foolproof, but I'll take resilient.
Resilient. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us for our conversation on the theory of gathering.